The British Schindler, the inspiring life of Nicholas. Nicholas Winton was not a man who sought fame. He never imagined his name would one day be spoken with reverence, nor did he want it to be. He lived his life quietly, working, raising a family, and tending his garden, content in the knowledge that he had simply done what he believed was right. And yet, without him, hundreds of lives, perhaps thousands if you count their children and grandchildren, might never have existed. Born in 1909 in Hampstead, London, to German Jewish parents who had converted to Christianity, Nicholas grew up in a home that valued hard work and compassion. His father was a successful banker, and Nicholas inherited his sharp mind for numbers. He became a stockbroker himself, navigating the fast-paced world of finance with confidence. But he was more than just a man in a suit. Those who knew him as a young man remembered his quiet kindness, his curiosity, and his unwillingness to ignore injustice. In December 1938, Nicholas planned a skiing holiday in Switzerland, eager for a break from the gray streets of London. But before he could leave, a phone call from his friend Martin Blake changed everything. Martin was in Prague, working with Jewish refugees who had fled the Sudetenland after Hitler's annexation, and he urged Nicholas to come and see for himself what was happening. Nicholas agreed. What he found when he arrived in Prague shocked him. Refugee camps overflowing with families, parents clutching children, their eyes hollow with fear and exhaustion. Makeshift shelters that barely kept out the cold. Nicholas wandered the camps watching the children huddle together, trying to stay warm. He felt a heaviness settle in his chest. That night, back in his hotel room, he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of the mothers who had clung to him that day, begging him to help their children. And so he decided he would help, somehow. He didn't know how yet, but he couldn't walk away. He learned of a British government policy that allowed Jewish children under 17 to come to the UK if they had foster families waiting, and a £50 guarantee to cover their eventual return. It was a small loophole in an otherwise closed door, but it was enough. The next day, Nicholas turned his hotel room into an office. Borrowing a typewriter, he began collecting names. Parents lined up to register their children, clutching photographs and letters, whispering prayers. When Nicholas returned to London, he threw himself into the task of finding British families to take in the children. He wrote letters to newspapers, to community centers, to synagogues, pleading for help. He knocked on doors, made phone calls, lobbied government officials. Time was running out. On March 14, 1939, the first train left Prague carrying 20 children, each with a tag around their neck and a suitcase in their hand. The parents stood on the platform, tears streaming down their faces as they waved goodbye, trying to smile for the sake of their children. The children sat stiffly on the train, some crying, some silent, clutching their dolls or stuffed animals. Nicholas met them in London, matching each child with their waiting foster family. And then he went back to work. Another train, and another. Each one harder to arrange than the last, each one more urgent. By the time the borders closed in September 1939, Nicholas had saved 669 children. A final train, scheduled to carry 250 more, never left. He thought of those children often, their names etched into his memory. When the final train was canceled, Nicholas could not help but feel he had failed those left behind. He carried their memory with him quietly, a silent weight on his conscience. Yet even as war broke out across Europe, he continued to believe he had simply done what anyone in his position should have done. He joined the Royal Air Force during the war, serving with the same quiet determination he had shown in Prague. After the war ended, he returned to civilian life, resumed his work as a stockbroker, and married a woman named Greta. Together they raised a family. To those around him, Nicholas appeared like any other husband and father, commuting to the city each day, tending his garden on weekends, enjoying quiet dinners at home. He never spoke about what he had done in Prague, not to his colleagues, not to his children, not even to his wife. To him, it was simply something that needed to be done. He saw no reason to bring it up again. It wasn't until decades later, in 1988, that the world learned of his secret. Greta was cleaning their attic when she discovered an old scrapbook. Inside were photographs of children, lists of names, letters from grateful parents. Confused, she brought it to Nicholas and asked him what it was. He looked at the book and shrugged. Just something I was involved with before the war, he said. But Greta knew there was more to it than that. She contacted a BBC television program called That's Life, and producers invited Nicholas to appear in the audience of a live broadcast. He thought he was simply attending as a guest, unaware of what they had planned. The host recounted the story of a man who had saved 669 children from the Holocaust, and then she turned to Nicholas and revealed that they were speaking about him. He sat stunned, unsure what to say. Then she asked if anyone in the audience owed their life to him. Slowly, people began to stand. Dozens of people around him rose to their feet. They turned to face him, their eyes filled with tears. The children he had saved, now adults with children and even grandchildren of their own, stood to honor him. Applause filled the studio. Nicholas sat quietly, overcome with emotion, the realization of what he had accomplished washing over him for the first time in 50 years. From that day forward, his story spread around the world. Journalists wrote about him, documentaries were made, schools invited him to speak to students, governments honored him with awards and medals. In 2003, he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II. In 2014, he was awarded the Czech Republic's highest honor, the Order of the White Lion. Yet despite the attention, he never stopped insisting he was not a hero. The parents were the brave ones, he would say. They were the ones who put their children on those trains, not knowing if they would ever see them again. He always deflected praise, always insisted he had simply done what anyone else would have done. To Nicholas, the work was never really finished. Even in his later years, he continued to advocate for refugees and displaced children, writing letters to officials and reminding people that the world's responsibility to those in need had not ended. Indifference is the biggest enemy, he would say. If you see something wrong and think someone else will fix it, nothing will ever change. Even as he passed his 100th birthday, he retained his wit and his warmth. He delighted in his grandchildren's laughter. He spent time in his garden. He continued to inspire everyone who met him. He lived to see the families of the children he had saved grow and thrive. At reunions, they would introduce him to their children and grandchildren. One woman hugged him tightly and said, "We are all your family now." Nicholas smiled at her, his eyes glistening, and said softly, "That's all I ever wanted." Even in his final years, Nicholas remained the same humble, gentle man he had always been. He often said he never planned to be remembered, never thought his story would matter to anyone else. And yet his story became a beacon of hope for countless people around the world. In Prague, a statue was erected at the train station where the children had boarded their trains to freedom. It shows a young boy and girl clutching their suitcases, their faces hopeful but uncertain. In London, plaques and memorials were placed in his honor. But his greatest legacy could not be carved in stone. It lived in the lives of those he had saved, in their children, in their grandchildren, in the countless others who heard his story and decided to help someone in need because of him. At ceremonies and reunions, Nicholas would sometimes stand and speak, always briefly, always modestly. He would tell those gathered, "The world is in your hands. You can make it better if you choose to. Don't wait for someone else to do it." To the children he had saved, he was more than a hero. He was the reason they were alive, the reason their families existed. One man once told him, "Every good thing in my life, every joy, every child's laughter, every quiet moment, all of it is thanks to you." Nicholas would smile and shake his head. "It's thanks to all of you," he would reply. In one of his last interviews, Nicholas was asked what he thought his story meant. He thought for a moment and then said, "That anyone can do something. You don't have to wait for someone else. You just have to care enough to act." Even at 106 years old, he still believed the world could be better if more people simply chose to care. On July 1st, 2015, Nicholas Winton passed away peacefully in his sleep, on the anniversary of the day the first train of children left Prague in 1939. It seemed fitting somehow, as though his story had come full circle. His funeral was attended by family, friends, and many of those he had saved. They spoke of his kindness, his humility, his unwavering belief in the power of good. One woman, who had been just a little girl when he put her on a train to safety, stood and said, "We are his forest. We grew from the seeds he planted." And in that quiet chapel, there was no doubt that his life had meant something extraordinary. Today, his story continues to inspire. Teachers tell it in classrooms. Writers put it into books. Filmmakers bring it to the screen. But more importantly, it lives in the choices of ordinary people who decide to help when they could just as easily look away. Nicholas Winton showed us that courage does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers quietly from a hotel room in Prague. It fills out forms, writes letters, knocks on doors, never stops, never gives up. His story reminds us that we are all capable of more than we think, that doing good does not require wealth or power or fame, only the willingness to act. As you read his story now, perhaps you feel that same stirring in your heart. Perhaps you see something in the world that needs fixing. Perhaps you wonder if you can make a difference. You can. Look around. Notice what needs doing, and then do it. Even if it feels small, even if it feels impossible, especially then. Because as Nicholas Winton said, if it is not impossible, then there must be a way to do it. Find the way. Be the way. Even the smallest act of kindness can change the world.